I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Sometimes it takes a different approach to help you unlock your true potential. Capella University's game-changing FlexPath format helps you learn at your own pace and fit earning a degree into your life. From before you enroll to after you graduate, you'll be supported by people who are invested in your success so you can pursue your goals knowing that help is available if you need it. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
We've all used Gmail now for 10 years? Gmail's been around for 10 years? I don't know how long. But I go back 7 to 10 years in my Gmail, and I'll find somebody who wrote to me who I never responded to, and I'll hit reply, and I'll respond as if they had written to me 1 second ago, and I'll just give a real response. And I find it's a great way to, get back in touch with somebody and maybe have a new kind of fun experience. They remember it. They'll be fascinated that I responded like that. So it's a weird way of building up a connection again with somebody, and so that it's one that's memorable as opposed to, hey, just thinking about you, how are you doing? Like if someone asked me for coffee in 2007, and let's say I never replied, I'll reply back and say, sure, how's next Tuesday at 2:00? And it's amazing how much benefit I've gotten out of that. Like I've gotten so many great interactions have happened after that. Okay, I'm doing a special podcast about what are the best 1-minute life hacks. I'm joined here by Steve Cohen, and we have a few other guests who might pop up. But I just want to add first, thanks to WeWork for hosting this podcast. I'm sitting in a WeWork facility. I've never been in one, and this is like an adult Disneyland here. There's a ping pong table, there's a music studio, there's chefs.
Free stuff.
Yeah, there's like...
You had me at free stuff.
I feel like everybody is just... Are they working or are they just like having fun out here?
And in my mind, I'm listening to this song by REM, Shiny Happy People, because they all seem really happy.
Yeah, I'm like looking out. There's like a lot of computers. They do seem like they're working hard, but then other people are having meetings. We're kind of in a glass case doing this podcast. So there's podcast studios here.
Yeah.
So like I'm not even trying to...
Fishbowl, I know.
Like WeWork's not sponsoring this podcast. They just let us sit here. But
no greater zealot than the recent convert, though. And we're here, and it's...
But here's the interesting thing. I sort of feel everybody calls this the sharing economy, but it's really the access economy. So meaning, like WeWork is not sharing office space. They're not like a charitable organization. You pay and you have access to office space. But 20 years ago, my first business, we would get a 10,000 square foot office space, and we spent a lot of money. But here, you could just join a membership. You could show up at any WeWork, and you have access to empty desks and meetings and conference room and podcast studios and kitchens
Sure.
and ping pong tables. And it's like Uber. Uber doesn't share cars. Some people have access to empty seats in their cars that they want to give away and monetize. Some people want access to those excess empty seats, and Uber is really the business is the platform in the middle that allows people who have excess and connects them to people who want access, and they handle all the logistics, the search, the payments, the customer troubles, everything. Airbnb. Some people have excess rooms. Other people want access to those excess rooms. And Airbnb is just, they don't own any of the rooms. They just are the platform in the middle that allows for search, payments, customer service, and all sorts of other things. And so it seems like, and WeWork's the same place.
Yeah.
Some people have access to excess office space. Other people want that, willing to pay for that excess office space. And WeWork's the platform in the middle. What I wonder is, when do you actually have to, at some point, we'll never have to buy anything anymore. You'll just kind of use all the things you have access to, like whether it's clothes or chefs or restaurants or office space or cars or whatever.
I was going to say a few things to that. One, I hadn't heard that distinction before between access and share, because I feel like share is kind of a euphemism. Like we have Kamal, Bilyana, and Jay here. I might want to share my coffee with them, then I'm not going to charge them. But if they want access to my coffee, they're going to have to pay, So
no,
I think
but there
that's
are
interesting.
companies, speaking of food and beverages, there are companies, and it's a little bit harder, but let's say, where there's like Seamless or Grubhub, where there's all these restaurants with excess food.
Yes.
And or excess capacity to make food. There's people like me who want to sit at home and not go out to eat. And then Grubhub is the platform in the middle that allows me to search, allows me to order from the best chefs around. And then they handle all the customer payments, the transactions, the logistics of delivery, customer service again. And again, it's not like I ever have to cook. I can just get access to the best meals made by the best chefs.
Well, the other thing I was going to say, being at WeWork, that I remember when it was really starting to explode and it keeps doing a lot better. We're in one of 50 in New York City, that I thought was instructive was they took what other people might have looked at as a real estate company and they made it seem like a lifestyle. And it was just before the podcast, you were talking about why you invest in stuff, because how it makes you feel or the perceived value. And that's similar to here. You have a good feeling about being here. It's not just a kind of pedestrian office space. It's a cool environment. It's inspiring.
By the way, that's not why I invest in something. That might be why I buy something.
Oh, interesting.
So investing is a completely different thing.
Yeah, no, you and Kamal forgot more than I know.
Let's not confuse the two.
I speak humbly.
So,
yes.
So here, before we get into the best woman life hacks, here's the idea that just came to me. Considering that we live in this access economy and more things we're just going to have easier access to, as opposed to a need to buy. It used to be, in order to live in a house, you had to buy a house. Then you could rent. Then you could Airbnb. Same thing with cars. If you wanted an SUV, you had to buy it. Then you could rent it. Now I can just get an SUV anytime I want. I don't have to spend $100,000 to get an SUV. I can just drive one all over the city using Uber for $20. But here's the idea of the day. Let's create, or any of the listeners can create, because I'm not going to do it, create access in a box, access economy in a box. So it's software that you could just, get on the web, or it could be in the cloud or whatever, and you can just fill in. You fill in. The software is basically the platform in the middle, which handles search, posting, payment, logistics, customer service, and the person who has the access economy in a box software can put in whatever category it is, like babysitters. So,
interesting.
Babysitters and parents. So now I'm a parent. The software would specify I'm going to upload the age of my kid, any issues, where I live. Then it'll show me all the potential babysitters in the area who are available. A babysitter. This is just an example of a use. I don't know if this is a good use or not. It could be nurse. You create babysitter in a box. You create nurses in a box. You could create whatever. But access economy in a box. You kind of generalize the basic things in the Uber platform, the Airbnb platform, the WeWork platform, the Grubhub platform, and all these things are multi-billion-dollar companies. Like Uber's going to go public for $120 billion. Well, Kamal, what do you think of this idea? Access economy in a box.
The software layer, you mean?
Yeah. Creating that platform that's basically, it's the same platform for every one of these companies.
People have tried it.
They have?
People tried it with apps. It didn't go anywhere. Because you still need that on the other side. People have to be passionate enough to like do it, to build that. So rather than the software layer, just go. It's not that hard to build step by step one of these. Just go off and do that.
But I'm saying I don't know which business will work, like nurses and the Uber of nurses, the Uber of babysitters, the Uber of chefs. But I'm saying I want to create the platform in the middle so that anyone else can create their Uber of X company, to kind of generalize it. See what I'm saying?
Yeah. I would just say people like, if you're a nurse and you want to build an Uber of X, build an Uber for nurses. You know that space. If you're a Y, build an Uber for Y, the space that you know that you have an unfair advantage on. So the software layer is like how you'll make money on that. With the SaaS business, you have to have some things really take off for that thing to make money.
Or maybe you have to partner with somebody who has an instant use for it. Like
like someone who's got that idea, who's got the network, who's got like the people there, but they don't know how to build the software part. You build it for them, but use that.
And then you generalize it.
That's the way to do it.
All right, on to...
I wish
That
I
was
had,
the idea of the day. Not all ideas are good, but it's worth having an idea,
Yeah.
right? It's
No,
it's worth considering an idea.
I wish I had my waiter's pad to write that down.
Like we just identified a multi-billion-dollar
Yeah.
potential industry, and it's not unreasonable to come up with like one idea or a couple ideas to make it easier. Okay, best 1-minute life hacks. The first one, Steve, you just mentioned, waiters pads. This is such a great life hack for me. I've written about it before, but I want to describe why I always carry around waiters pads. Let me see. I even have one in my pocket right now. So it says,
For those of you who can't see, he pulled a waiter's pad out of his pocket.
it says guest check on it. It has date, table, guest, server, and then you can have, and then it has about 15 lines where you can put things. So the reason this is such a great hack for a lot of reasons. One is it's a great place for me to put my 10 ideas a day because you can't really write a lot. You could only write bullet points. So it forces you to go from idea to idea and not spend too much time on any one idea. It makes you quickly write down the most important things and not write an entire novel. But there's a couple ideas in this that makes it a hack. And by the way, I hate the word life hacks because I feel like that's overused. So I don't know what a better word is though. That's why I just use, what's a better word than life hack?
Just go with it for now.
Yeah. So here's what happens in a meeting, and here's why I like using this. Let's say I'm in a meeting with 5 people, and it's a board meeting or it's an investor meeting or whatever. Everyone pulls out their Moleskine, their expensive notebooks that's like $80, and they get their expensive fountain pens and dip it in ink and start writing. And I just pull out my waiter's pad and throw it right on the table. And 100% of the time, someone will say, I don't know why they all think it's an original joke, but they all say this has happened 100 meetings in a row. Someone will say, I'll take fries with that burger. Like that's the joke everyone uses. And
What was that percentage of times again?
100% of the time.
Okay.
And, and then, so we'll joke about that. And then people will say, why do you have a waiter's pad? And I'll say the thing about the bullet points, but also I'll say it cost me 10 cents a pad and I want to be frugal. So I've just become center of the conversation at this important meeting. B, I demonstrate in a real way without bragging that I'm frugal. I demonstrate how frugal I am. And it's also quirky. So you stand out in a meeting. You always want to be the person who's a little outside of the comfort zone, the place least crowded. So, and I will also say in a restaurant, if I sit down in a restaurant and I just put the waiter's pad down next to me, the way other people put phones down next to them, the waiters always treat me better.
Well, and I'll say to your credit, like these aren't just things for you to be perceived as eccentric. You do this. You do this a lot. Like you actually had a lot of $2 bills or other of your eccentricities that have worked for you, right? So I guess people listening out there find stuff that works for you. But I could see why that would work for you. Like I would always have a spiral notebook, and I kind of have my own systems where I like in red I might put like a guest we want to have on the show so it stands out so I can look back and do it. Or green I might say you need to sleep more. Like personal stuff. Blue I might say I just have a code, like kind of like USA Today. Green is money, red is sports. I don't know who reads USA Today other than people in hotels, but like I used to read it. Purple
I
is
used to
life,
deliver
red
it.
is sports, and blue is life. So I think, I think we've talked about this before, where Scott Adams always says like you want to have a goal and a system, and if you have a system, maybe it helps you reach your goals.
Well, and here's the thing about the system is that, I can't write a diary in a waiter's pad. Really, this is so I can write 10 ideas and I try to fit them on one page. So it forces me to not write too much. It forces me to be very concise in my thinking. Or if I'm having a podcast guest and I'm writing all the things I'm learning, it just forces me to be very concise because I can't fill out page after page after page. It's just a waiter's pad. It's small. And it fits in my pocket.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel like whatever system one wants to use, it has to work for you. And another thing I like about that, and they're cheap enough for you to lend me some. If they're only 10 cents a waiter's pad, you should give me like 5 or 10, and I'll borrow them.
All right.
I want access to your waiter's pads.
By the way, I say the first time I bought waiter's pads, it cost. I went to the Bowery and it cost me 10 cents. I bought 100 pads for $10, but now I own a bar, so I get the waiter's pads for free.
Like I like to say, if it's free, I'll take 3. But what I was going to say about that is I was listening to Jason Calacanis talk about when he's in meetings, he eschews the idea of having a phone over there because, if you have a pad, people know you're not looking at your phone. Even if I a lot of times use the notes aspect of my phone. And, I think there's something to be said about, hey, if you're taking notes, they know you're kind of serious and you're focused on them and you're present. Right? Like, it's not like you're writing your grocery list on there.
They could see, like, I feel like with the more expensive notebooks, they can't necessarily see what you're doing. With the waiter's pad, they could see I'm clearly not doodling, I'm taking notes. By the way, there's some research about the phone. If you're at a lunch and your phone is out, even if it's face down, the person will pay, like, I don't know how they research this, but the person will basically pay 20% less attention to you that you're having lunch with if your phone is out, even with its face down. So it's just some.
I only caught 80% of what you just said.
All right, the next hack. This was told to me by an ex. He wouldn't tell me if he was ex-CIA or ex-DIA, which is the Defense Intelligence Agency, but he was a member of some intelligence agency. I met him on a plane. He's actually been on this podcast, but I won't. Oh, actually, I could say what his name was. R.P. Eddy, who was on this podcast. And it's a lie detection hack. And he used to be an interrogator for the Defense Department on some very high-profile cases. That I can't mention which cases because I don't know. I don't know if he told me in confidence, but he definitely it was on a red eye from California, and he was, drinking a little bit, and so he's telling me these high-profile cases. But the hack is if you ask someone a question and they don't, they answer it, but not with the direct answer. So if you say, I always think in terms of relationships, but if you say, hi honey, where'd you go last night? And she responds, oh, I went out with friends. Notice she didn't answer the question. So I'm not saying she's lying, but there's more to the story, usually, which may or may not be true. That was just his point of doing this for like 20 years. And that's how with defense and when he's interrogating like potential spies, he always listens for if they're actually answering the question or slightly changing the answer to fit a different question. So I don't know if that resonates or makes sense.
I definitely think so. No, I think it's instructive. Just what you said. Like if they're not answering the question or they deflect, I think as you spend more and more time with somebody, you'll know if they're habitually evasive or, passive about stuff.
And they might be evasive at different levels in different ways. So you have to observe that. So that's related to his next lie detection hack that he told me, which is he would always give the person he was interrogating a rolling chair, and he would ask some basic questions. Like this is almost like a lie detector test. What a lie detector test is. He would ask basic questions that he would know are truthful, like, hey, where do you live? How old are you? What's your job title? And then he would get asked harder and harder questions. And if they start to roll away with the chair or use the rolling aspect of the chair a little more, he would know that they're starting to lie.
And I think, I thought about that, and I think it's instructive on a number of levels. Like, if you're people always say, like, say the truth. It's easier. You won't have to remember what you said, or you'll always remember what you said. And if you're not telling the truth, it stands to reason that you're thinking of some other believable story that would suffice. So that's why there's that pause too. Like if you're in a chair, you're moving back so that you have more time to kind of construct an alternate story.
You ever see the movie Now You See Me with Jesse Eisenberg?
I'm familiar with the film, but I have not seen it.
Have you seen it, Kamal?
With
well,
Jim
the
Carrey
first one.
And Woody Harrelson?
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So Woody Harrelson plays this kind of mentalist and there's one scene where he's trying to figure out the name of somebody that someone's having an affair with. And so he just very quickly says, A, B, C, D, E. And then he's looking at the person's face for a slight change in expression. And he gets to J. He's like, J, Janice, Janelle, and he figures out the person's name because he sees twitches.
Yeah.
So I decided to try this technique. So my girlfriend said, I bought popcorn, but I hid it from you. And so I did this exact same thing. I said really quickly, like every, cabinet and drawer. And she did actually twitch on a certain, when I mentioned a certain cabinet, and that was the cabinet where she had the popcorn hidden. So it does sort of work if you know how to, if you know a person's kind of language of expressions and twitches. Now, if someone who's a professional mentalist probably knows it very well, so you could do it with anyone. But that technique does seem to work.
Just look for like tells.
Yeah.
Well, you play a lot of poker, right? I'm sure some of that works with poker too.
Yeah, though tells are very valuable in poker. Particularly, tells are the main way in poker you make money if you're really good playing someone really bad. If you're both really good, tells could be insidious because a very good player will fake a tell. So you have to determine if someone's faking a tell or faking a tell. But if you're just playing someone, like I remember one time I was playing at a poker club. This is exactly 20 years ago. Norm Macdonald, the comedian, shows up. He was much younger, Norm Macdonald. And everybody wanted to sit right next to him because whoever sits to the left of the worst player at the table wins the most money because the person bets, you raise, and then everyone else goes out, and it's just you versus that person. But Norm Macdonald had so many tells. Everyone was, and he would just go back for more and more money. Everybody wanted to sit next to him. Anyway,
ideally, you want somebody who's really bad and who has a lot of money.
Exactly. That's exactly true. And that works for
the best combination.
That works for poker and other gambling games like backgammon. Okay, networking hack. This was told to me by a different ex. He again, nobody admits that they're CIA, but this person was special forces and some intelligence agency. So he basically told me, even if you don't smoke, always carry around a pack of cigarettes. And he said, for instance, let's say someone you want to network with is at a restaurant and takes a smoking break. Even if you're at another table, you could now take a smoking break with them and start talking to them. And you could follow them outside and start a conversation. The other thing is, let's say you leave your cigarettes behind right before someone you want to network with is sitting down at a restaurant, a club, a meeting. You can step outside, then you can go back and say, "Ugh, I left my cigarettes here," and that gives you a chance to start talking. So I thought that was an interesting networking hack.
Yeah.
Unobvious. No one would suspect you of doing these things on purpose.
Yeah, like when I was in news or TV, you would forget something somewhere, so you can go in and eavesdrop on somebody, or and I think
You would
that yeah, you're
you
just
would
kind
do
of like,
that.
hey, I'm
What
sorry, I
did you
forgot
ever?
it. Don't mean to linger around, but
What did you ever hear?
no, you could hear all kinds of things. I mean, if you were at a particular place and you see people huddling over there, and then they look at you as if you're an interloper, and you're like, sorry, I just forgot my book over there. Don't mean to eavesdrop, but we're meaning to eavesdrop. I'm just saying, but
Do you ever see that Seinfeld, George Costanza actually leaves a tape recorder and a briefcase behind at
yeah,
a meeting? So he tried it in a very, kind of the thing we always think about. Like, what if I just left? I always wonder, like, I used to have an office on 19th Street with my first business, and I always used to think I should just wire up the elevator because somebody meets you, they get on the elevator, and obviously they're gonna talk about the meeting. I thought that would be a great way to discover how to get clients better. Like, of course it would be illegal, and I'm not sure if it's illegal. It would be unethical. We never did it. I should have done it because it probably would have made more money for the business. But after a meeting now, because I used to think that way, after a meeting, I never talk in the elevator because I think if I was thinking that, I'm thinking someone else was thinking it who would do it actually did it.
oh for sure, yeah.
Do you know anyone who's done that? It seems like such an obvious way to make more money if you have a business and if millions of dollars are at stake.
Just for those of you out there, so you're talking about like recording the elevator, like afterwards,
Yeah.
so you could see what's going on. Yeah, I mean, I don't know anybody who's done it.
And if they did, I don't think they'd talk about it. You know, the cigarettes thing? I know someone who's actually gotten out of like really hairy situations in like middle of Africa or Middle East or with police and military by just offering them cigarettes.
Yeah, because cigarettes are currency in a lot of situations.
No, but she was like, it humanizes you. It's like, if they're like being rough and like how third world militaries are, third world police is, and you're just sharing a cigarette with them. All of a sudden, you're no longer just, some suspect. You're a human being offering them a cigarette.
Yeah,
It's literally got her out of some pretty hairy stuff.
And they always tell people who are about to go to jail, make sure you have a good access to lots of cigarettes.
Yeah, thankfully none of us are going to jail anytime soon. But
Knocking on wood.
I personally carry a lot of gum. I like gum. I like different flavors, and that could serve a similar purpose. Now, people don't habitually go outside and have a gum break, but like it's nice to give a piece of gum to people. When you see them. I mean, no, there are different ways you could offer. If you're in Canada, you could have marijuana.
So this is
Right?
this next hack, and we're kind of just churning through these. If anyone has any questions, post them on Twitter, and we'll describe more. But this next one is, I call it an interview or speaking hack. So not an interview like a podcast interview, but like if you're doing a job interview, or if you're doing public speaking. So if you're doing a job interview, you say something like, I'm sure all the others you've interviewed before me were great, but, and then you start your interview. Or if you're doing public speaking, let's give a hand for all the others who came before me. Everyone gives a hand. And this is actually a cognitive bias. It's called choice ambiguity bias. And if you kind of lump in a whole group of people as some mysterious other, then the brain of the person you're talking to has a hard time all of a sudden remembering who they spoke to because they're now in this big group called the other. And it's a very powerful technique to make your talk stand out or your interview stand out. And I've used this very effectively, and it works. I don't know why it works. It just creates kind of an out group, and then the in group is you and the audience, or you and the person you're interviewing with. Now they treat you in a different way than this. Everybody else feels ambiguous now once you do that.
I think that's a great thing, and unless you're the first speaker.
Well,
but
maybe then you can say give a hand for because
Yeah.
I've thought about this. I always try to be the last speaker at a conference
Sure.
so I can say this. But if you're the first speaker, you could find other ways to do it. Like I'm sure everyone coming ahead of me is going to say this.
Oh, smart.
That's not such a bad thing for them to say. But I just want to say these things. So again, you throw them in a group with a very generic thing that they could
And
say.
I remember there was Howard Bragman wrote a book about PR, and he was a very successful public relations person. And he said, I have these clients who said, like, I just feel I'm a blonde, interchangeable anchor, and this attractive blonde, and he said that's the worst thing you really want to do is be interchangeable. You want to be unique in your own way. So by emphasizing that these other people are others, then you're distinguishing yourself right away.
I don't quite understand why it's a cognitive bias. Like other cognitive biases, like confirmation bias, I could understand. So confirmation bias is, I believe in some political issue, and then your brain just starts to look for examples of where you're right because it's invested time into thinking you're right. So it wants to find more ways to prove you're right. So I understand how that cognitive
Yeah.
bias works. I really don't understand why this bias works,
But
but it does.
Well, it's kind of like the rapper Ice Cube. Not that there's a Dr. Ice Cube or a dentist Ice Cube or accountant, but
The
where
rapper,
he exactly
rapper, comma, Ice
of all
Cube.
of all the Ice Cubes out there, this one's a rapper, and he said, "There's a lot of you and one of me," and that's essentially what you're saying, right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
a lot of you other speakers out there. There's one James Altucher with his weight over his pad and $2 bills.
Oh, and so I even mentioned actually in the notes to this, this is related to recency bias, where you try to be the last person interviewed or the last person to speak on the agenda, because people in any situation remember two things. They remember the peak moment of emotional intensity. So if someone goes on stage and says something completely outrageous, you'll remember that. But they also remember. So there's some other bias there. But they also always remember the most recent, and so that helps as well. So I don't know how you can always arrange that, but if you combine that with this choice ambiguity bias, then by the way I found out about this is I was speaking at an event, and I was very nervous, and I asked a professor of behavioral psychology, what should I do? And he's the one who told me about these biases and see if you can be the last. And I remember I was the second to last. The last person to speak at this conference was Tim Ferriss. And so the way I approached it was when I went up on the stage, I said, well, I am the last speaker before Tim Ferriss. Give it up to all the other pre-Tim Ferriss speakers. And now I'm standing out using this bias.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players, and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply.
This one's a writing hack that I'm curious if you guys use, but I almost always use it. I use it like 90% of the time. And by the way, before I say the hack, even being aware of this hack while I'm writing doesn't matter. I still use this hack and it makes my writing better. So the hack is, you write something and whatever it is you wrote, remove the first paragraph and the last paragraph, and it'll be your writing will have more impact. And so it's interesting, even being aware of that while I'm writing the first paragraph and the last paragraph doesn't matter. Still removing the first and the last paragraphs tend to make the writing better. And I think it's because when you're writing the first paragraph, you don't really know yet how the piece is going to shape up, so you're a little more nervous writing it, and so it's not as strong. And the last one, you're trying to kind of find some nifty, almost artificial way of having a conclusion. But if you remove the first and the last, it's like it reads now as if you dove right into the story, right into the most emotional parts of the story. And if you conclude without the last paragraph, there's no more nifty summary and conclusion. There's just this end. And that's usually more beautiful and poetic somehow. And it's more kind of a more real conclusion. I don't know if you've noticed that, Kamal, in your writing.
You're absolutely right. Especially that ending part. Because ending, you're trying. 'Cause especially when you've written something good.
And beginnings you're trying. Like often people are stuck at the beginning. They get writer's block at the beginning and they're trying too hard at the ending.
Yeah, yeah. You know what I found also sometimes? I'll move them. I'll see that they actually go somewhere else in the piece if they're really good. So I don't get, but you're especially the ending, that ending part. Yeah,
And I always try, like I'll write anything and just even to see, I'll just cut out the first and the last and then read it over. And almost every single time it's
Yeah.
better, even though I'm aware of this hack.
yeah. 9 times out of 10, I'd say that work.
And you are very economical with your writing, right? Like,
Yeah,
I've heard both of you talk about how some people pad their writing with a lot of extraneous verbiage that, and again, it seems ironic coming from me talking about extraneous verbiage, but that they don't really need, right?
yeah. I think a lot of it comes from actually. I don't know what it is, insecurity, or you feel like you have to over-explain or whatever. But economy of words is I think is the purest form of writing.
Yeah, I mean, another writing hack that I do, which I've never really, maybe I've written about it once, but I've again, this one I call a hack because it's almost like a trick to easily make your writing. It almost, I think of hacks as things that require no work but make your life a little better. This next thing requires a little bit of work, but whenever I write a first draft of something, I try to make the second draft 30% less, 30% fewer words. And that tends to work for me as well. Like I really try hard to scrub out 30% of the words.
Yeah, the second draft should be a lot leaner than the first draft. The
Yeah.
first draft, you're just basically vomiting over the page.
Yeah, and sometimes there's a temptation, oh, I forgot to write this, I forgot to write that. But then I try to, again, make at least the final draft 30% less than the first draft. And that tends to work really well. Because people get bored now if they read for too long.
Yeah, Love Yourself was like 90% less than what the original drafts were.
Well, your book, Love Yourself, taught me a lot about book writing in general in today's world. We've always been told by mainstream publishers, hey, don't submit a book until it's 65,000 words. But in a day and age where bookstores are disappearing, publishers can't even get books into bookstores anymore. I mean, bookstores are much more selective. And Amazon with CreateSpace and Kindle and so on, it's much easier to self-publish. The definition of a book is no longer 65,000 words. Love Yourself, I think, was 8,000 words.
Correct.
And was a best-selling book. And it's nobody says, oh, that was just a long article. It's a book. And people view it as a book. Like the definition of a book has changed, and you taught me that. And I still wish I could follow that advice and write an 8,000-word book, because then I would write like a book every other day or so. Probably a boring book, but it's interesting.
I just think sometimes, on the podcast, we get a lot of authors, and some I'm less impressed with than others, because I think, as the old Mark Twain adage said, this letter would be shorter if I had more time. And I think some authors make you do a lot of work that they should be doing the work. It takes work to economize and to get rid of stuff that you don't need there. And so I think you do, both of you, you're very economical when you write, and every word matters, and I think that's the way it should be.
Well, there's a Facebook group called Writers and Rant, or Write and Rant, which I don't know. Are you a member of that Facebook group?
Doesn't sound like one I would want to join.
But you were funny because Tucker Max just mentioned you in a comment this morning on that group. But somebody asked the question, how many words should a business book be? And there was like 100 responses. People were saying 60,000 words, 65,000 words. Ryan Holiday, of course, being one of the smartest people around, said, write how many words you need. and no more, no less. And Tucker said, different, write as few words as possible and used your book as an example. And I responded, don't write a business book.
Yeah,
I'm just
that's
sick,
probably the best advice.
because I'm
Actually.
just sick of like every business book, they're just using it to get speaking gigs and consulting gigs. I don't need another book like, oh, how to be a leader, how to have great habits, how to, now in some cases, it's not a business book. Like I appreciate Jocko Willink's The Dichotomy of Leadership, and so on. He's coming at it from a very different point of view. But just somebody who studies academic research and then spits it out into a highly curated
voluminous
book.
detail too. That's what kills me. Where it's every single thing you ever wanted to know about that, and they're trying to prove their scholarship. And I don't get
I
a lot
hate
out
it.
of it. I don't remember a lot.
Which
out
is
of
why
it.
we avoid
Yeah.
we avoid writers as opposed to the people who are experiencers, not just people who are spitting out academic research. Now, there's a couple of counter examples, like Yuval Harari wrote *Sapiens*, obviously did research on the history of the human species and wrote a fascinating book. So I think the best books like that are highly curated examples of lots of research, but not just spitting out scientific studies and just so they can get consulting gigs. And that's like the main style of book in the business book section.
I had someone recently DM me on Twitter, and she said she just finished the first draft of a book, and she had actually listened to our interview with you and I, where I said that Rebirth, I wrote at least 8 drafts, and she's like, I can't even imagine doing it. So she said, how many drafts do I need to do before it's ready to go? And I was thinking about it because there's no specific answer.
Right.
I'm like, so here's the answer: you have to know who you're writing for. If you're writing for yourself, vomit all over the page and publish. Done. It's out of your system. Done. But if you're writing for a reader, then you just got to go at it and hammer and chisel until it's the best you could have put out there. Then you put it out there.
Yeah,
So you got to know who you're writing for.
And I think 8 drafts, and again, there's no specific number that's the answer. I mean, what is it? Old Man and the Sea might have had 100 drafts. Who knows? But I think 8 drafts is probably about average, for a good book. And first draft is probably about average for a bad book.
First 3 drafts are,
and advice Stephen Dubner once gave me, which he got from a book by William Zinsser, who writes a lot about how to be a great nonfiction writer. But Stephen Dubner, who co-wrote Freakonomics, he suggested to me, and he told me what he does, which is after each draft, he reads the entire thing out loud, and whatever makes him feel cringeworthy, he knows he should take out. And so that's a good technique.
Yeah, that's one of the techniques I use. I read out loud, but that's a later draft. Then I also do another one where I print out, and then I read it. It reads different on paper than it does on screen. And every, like a different medium, it reads differently. And but ultimately the ear knows that before you hit the final draft, that last draft, you have to hear it to your ear. And every time you stumble when you're reading, you got to fix something there.
You just gave me an idea, which I use in other areas of my life, but maybe I should also use it for writing. Not only should you read it, but maybe you should take a video of yourself reading it and then watch that video.
Wow.
Because when you're reading it, you're hearing something differently than when you watch yourself reading it. So Steve had recently arranged for me to audition for a serious play. And the producer was there. They had serious cast members who were the readers for me. So I had to memorize lines, and I auditioned. And Jay, our audio engineer here, took the video. I came out of that audition thinking, man, I'm an actor. Like I did such a great job. I'm surprised they didn't put me on the main stage immediately. And then Jay sent me the video, and I'm like, man, I sucked. Like I could really see how I was different from the professionals who I was reading to. And I've greatly improved my stand-up comedy because Jay videotapes my stand-up. Just watching myself doing stand-up, I'll even watch myself on mute to see how my body's moving while I'm doing stand-up. It's such a drastic improvement. I'm going to try it with reading out loud, videotaping myself reading and watching that. So that's a kind
great
of
idea.
And
Well, Kamal always says what you measure improves, right? And that's just another way of measuring it, right?
Yeah.
yeah, Yeah, and that's a different way of measuring it. I think that's a good hack too. Is whatever you want to improve, figure out a way to measure it. That's not quite a hack. That's a
Yeah, and make
technique.
the measurement available in front of you on a daily basis. You can see the pattern. I mean, we just normally, like human beings, will want to step up. Put your weight every day, like on your bathroom mirror, like, just like once you start seeing the trend, you'll want it to get better.
Yeah, and it's a skill to come up with the right metric. Like losing weight, is an easy metric because you see pounds, but maybe you're eating less calories, but maybe it's all donuts instead of vegetables. So you have to figure out kind of the right metric, which is a challenge. And writing, it's not necessarily the number of we've been talking about various metrics like watch yourself and make sure nothing's cringeworthy. Um, Other people use Amazon sales ranks, which is not a bad metric, but it might not be perfect either. So you always want to think about what the right metric is. Two more hacks, and I think this is going to end up to be there's going to be a part two. But this one I call the email hack. I've written about this before, but I do this. I don't do this every day, but I probably do this a couple of times a week. I did this yesterday actually. Find go We've all used Gmail now for what, 10 years? Gmail's been around for 10 years. I don't know how long. But I go back 7 to 10 years in my Gmail, and I'll find somebody who wrote to me who I never responded to. And I'll hit reply, and I'll respond as if they had written to me 1 second ago. And I'll just give a real response as if they had written to me a second ago. And I find it's a great way to get back in touch with somebody and maybe have a new kind of fun experience. They remember it. They'll be fascinated that I responded like that. So it's a weird way of building up a connection again with somebody, and so that is one that's memorable as opposed to, hey, just thinking about you. How are you doing? Like if someone asked me for coffee in 2007, I'll reply back and say, let's say I never replied. I'll reply back and say, sure, how's next Tuesday at 2:00? And it's amazing how much benefit I've gotten out of that. Like I've gotten so many great interactions have happened after that. Yesterday, I'm trying to think how I can describe the example. It was someone who actually hadn't gotten in touch, who wrote me 2 years ago. I hadn't replied. And she was asking for a favor for her brother. And I replied, sure, send over his resume. And she was like, whoa. And we just started talking, and she ended up giving me advice about something that was very useful. And it magnifies the intensity of the interaction when you do it that way, and people respond accordingly because it's because of that heightened intensity. So I find that hack really works, and it's fun, and it's funny.
Yeah. I was going to say you wouldn't have your website without that
All
hack.
right. So the first time I did this was like 2009 or 2010. In 2003, a reader of mine wrote me. He knew it was my birthday. He wrote me and said, hey, I bought you a birthday gift. I bought JamesAltucher.com. And I thought to myself, oh, I'm never going to write my own blog on JamesAltucher.com. I don't need it. So I never responded to him. And so in 2009, I hit reply on that one. And I said, okay, that's great. Thank you so much. I'll take it. And so it was like a 6-year difference. And he wrote back and he's like, whoa, no one ever took that long to respond to me. But here's the thing. I'll tell you, he became a good friend. And he still had he kept paying for it. He had my website still. Wow. So I now have JamesAltucher.com as a result. And that was in 2009. He wrote me yesterday because he wanted to pitch an idea for a podcast. He had a friend who bought a domain name for practically nothing and then just sold it last week for $1 million. And he wanted to maybe describe the story on the podcast. So it was one I was going to forward to you.
I think it's great. Yeah. And I'll respond to you 5 years from now and say, yeah, let's do it.
So
I was going to give you a couple of email hacks that I learned. I just think on the subject line sometimes when people read it, like I remember when I left CBS after 10 years, I didn't say moving on or, I just said thank you, and people are more inclined to read something if you say thank you and you're grateful rather than self-absorbed and, hey, moving on to greener pastures, too bad, so sad. There's a way, I think. So when I'm dealing with people, I'm mindful of the words you use.
Oh
Like,
my God, that's such a great hack. Like, because you always see people moving on and saying, "Hey, I've had such a great time here. I've decided to make a change." In my, it's all
yeah,
about
yeah,
them.
yeah.
And instead of saying the thank you,
Like
you,
Madonna's tribute to Aretha Franklin.
like even
Sorry, Madonna. Like
even
you
when
a
you're
lot.
writing like an autobiography, you should still have the agenda of the readers in mind, even though it's a book about you.
Yeah.
Like I think when you wrote Love Yourself, or when I wrote Choose Yourself, or when we do these
Yeah.
podcasts, it's always with the listener or the reader in mind, even though you're writing about yourself or doing a podcast with a guest and so on. So that's a great addition to my hack, is to make sure their agenda.
There's that, and I'm always just careful about the words you use. And again, I'm always very mindful of not, handling people or manipulating people. I just think it makes me better in how I do things. If somebody's running late, I try not to say no problem. I'll say sure, great, can't wait to see you. It's just how we use our language, and I think it's important.
So I almost wish we could dive into more of these, but now we've been going for 40 minutes, and I have to
I had
wrap up
one.
soon. But we'll do a part 2, and the last one I want to do is the 1 second happiness hack, and because it's hard to be happy, so it's hard to make this a hack. But someone told me an equation once. They made it like a mathematical equation: happiness equals reality over expectations. So, and the example my friend told me was, like, imagine you're trying to lose weight. So your weight might be, I don't know, 200, and you would like to be 150. I'm making up numbers. So the reality is 150. The reality is 200 pounds, and the reality can only change slowly. But and you want to be 150, and you think you're going to be happy at 150. So that's so you're not going to be, because reality changes slowly, and your expectations is 150. It's going to be a long time before your happiness is 100%. So right now at 200 over 150, or maybe I'm reversing it. Am I reversing it? Maybe I'm reversing. Maybe it's the expectations.
Another
over
way to look
reality.
at it is, I've heard people talk about how your unhappiness equals like your expectation minus reality.
Yeah. So
if your
same.
expectations have millions of dollars and you're making $5 an hour, then you're that unhappy.
Right. So if your expectations go down, if you say, "Oh, I could be happy at 200 pounds," you could change that in a second, and instead of having to wait until you're 150, where you still might not be happy anyway. It's all, happiness becomes all about expectations, because reality is slow to move, but expectations you can change in a second. Like you could say, "Oh, if I was married, I'd be happy," but if you learn how to be happy where you are right now, or if your expectations are, "Look, I could be happy going to a movie tonight," then suddenly your expectations change. You're happy, and being happy might actually help you meet the person in your
absolutely.
life, or lose the weight, or whatever. So I always think of, whenever I think, "Oh, I'm unhappy," I always think of what expectation is not being, where are my reality and my expectations differing, and how can I change my expectations? Because you always can, right? It's all relative. Like, you're not in solitary confinement in jail for the rest of your life. Like, expectations can always change.
Well, another way that I look at it that's helped me quite a bit is just to really just focus on, your process rather than the outcome, and just to be very process oriented. And I think if one can do that, then they're a lot better off, and just in the case of weight loss, to say, okay, I'll feel good about myself if I could only eat 2,000 calories rather than if I have some external goal.
Well,
I'll feel good about myself if I try these 5 new things.
And Steve, how many podcast guests have we had where, process
37. Just kidding. I don't know.
Process is greater than outcomes for almost every single one of our podcast
Yes,
guests.
absolutely.
Like, take an author, take like your friend Brad Meltzer, who's been on the podcast. The outcome that an author wants is they want their book to be published and then to be a bestseller, and then more books, and then maybe a movie and whatever. Brad Meltzer got rejected. He submitted his book to whatever it was, 21 publishers, and he got rejected 23 times. So twice by 2 publishers who didn't know. And if his happiness depended on the outcomes, he would have been a very miserable man all the time. But he focused on being a better and better writer, writing more books, and eventually he got books accepted. Now he's selling millions of copies of books and writing. He's living the dream life. He's writing whatever he wants, and
Has a new TV show on PBS. We're happy for
writes
you,
comic
Brad.
books.
Yeah, comic books coming on the podcast. I want to say January 6th or January 7th. Got a new thriller.
But we see this with everybody. If like I had a friend of mine recently, her TV show got not accepted, and instead of saying, okay, I'm going to work on process, like A, I'm going to become a better writer, work on making a better TV show. B, I'm going to maybe look for other studios and other production companies. She got so depressed and felt so sorry for herself. And we learned from Amy Morin, who wrote 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. The first thing a mentally strong person doesn't do is feel sorry for yourself. And maybe you could feel sorry for yourself for 10 minutes, but don't spend a week feeling sorry for yourself because an outcome you had no control over. Like, you never know why someone rejects you. They could have had a bad day. They could be about to get fired. There could be some other agenda. If you always focus on the process, you're going to succeed. This is a marathon and not a sprint. Like, I lost all my money in 2002 or 2001, but I focused on how can I be a better investor? How can I be a better writer? How can I find more options in my life for success? If I had just depended on the outcome, I would have killed myself.
Speaking of killing yourself, Kamal.
Wow, with that lead in. There's interesting
Segue.
correlate. There's
Steve's
interesting
great at
correlate,
segues.
right? Like there's like the Buddha thing, where people say he said that life is suffering. I think there's a misunderstanding there. The nature of the mind is dissatisfaction. So even if we say I'm going to be happy, let's say we say I'm going to be happy when I lose 50 pounds, and you get there, you'll only be happy for a certain amount of time, and then you just fall back to your set state.
Right.
So what we got to work on is our set state. And with the process that Steve talks about, what process gives you is fulfillment. Like the act of writing itself, act of writing a great sentence or making progress in my book is so fulfilling. Like if publishing doesn't even meet that level of fulfillment.
Right. And the other thing to remember is when you start writing or you start anything that's worth doing, you're going to suck in the beginning. So like I see this more in kids, but like they'll play a game of tennis and they'll lose the very first time, or they'll play golf and lose the first time. And they say, oh, I suck. I should never do this again. Because kids have a tendency to focus immediately on outcome, because you take a test, you either get an A or an F. And if you get an F, you give up. But process, if you enjoy the process, you're okay with sucking for a while as you learn, because you see you get pleasure out of the improvement. And then if you just persist, and it's the whole thing, if you try to become 1% better a day, even though that doesn't really mean anything, like how do you become a 1% better writer? It's hard to quantify. But if you think in that way and you focus on process, that compounds and you become 3,800% better in a year, and you'll see the difference, and everyone else around you will see the difference.
I agree. Like I like to say, little by little, the little becomes a lot, and I think it's made me a lot happier just focusing on the process and just getting better and better. I know we're trying to wrap up. I know I'm like that kid in school who raises his hand and say, "Didn't you forget to give us homework?" But I wanted you to talk about the day you first alighted upon the waiter's pad and how that changed your life, because you had been going through a very bad time.
Yeah,
and you all of a sudden, did that spur you to becoming an idea machine, or you like?
Yeah. So what happened was everything. It was the perfect storm. And again, everybody, depression and unhappiness are relative. People have had it a lot worse than me, but I had made a company, sold a company. People know this story. I lost every single dime. I was losing my house. I couldn't sell the house because I lived right next to ground zero. So like the FBI still had quarantined the area, and the smell from 9/11 was there for a good year afterwards. Like nobody wanted to buy down there. So I was just essentially going to get my house seized and be forced to move. And I couldn't get hired for a job because I was an internet guy and the internet was bust. And at the time, this was, almost 20 years ago, I was a failed investor, so no one was going to hire me for that. And I had no other skills. I couldn't go back to a job. And I had 2 kids to raise. So I thought about killing myself for the life insurance policy because the kids were too young to remember me. Blah, blah, blah. I've told all this story before. So again, it's all relative. But I used to take these really long walks uh, just to, I don't know, I felt good and it got me out of the house and it kind of got me out of my head a little bit. I would take these long walks and I was walking past Chinatown and there's this one little strip in the Bowery where you can buy restaurant supplies. And I don't know why I walked into that store and I saw this box of waiter's pads and I bought them. I just like the design of a waiter's pad too. They like look good to me. There's sort of this nostalgic 1950s or 1940s look to a waiter's pad. There's something about waiter's pads I like. Plus I have a fetish about waitresses. So I don't know. I wanted a waiter's pad. And then the next day, again, I have nothing going on. I had lost all my money. I was losing everything. So I would just wake up. I couldn't sleep ever. So I'd sleep 4 hours a night because I was depressed. And I would always go to a cafe and I would take a nonfiction book to learn something, a fiction book to learn to write better, and a book about games because I always loved improving at any game. And I took this time a waiter's pad with me. And I started writing 10 ideas a day, and I'll describe the first list in a second. But after about 3 months, people don't realize, people are like, oh, ideas are a dime a dozen. I can come up with ideas anytime. Good ideas are really hard. And maybe a dime for a dozen ideas is true, but to come up with thousands of ideas so you can find maybe 1 or 2 good ones, that's much more than a dime. And plus, execution ideas people say execution is everything. You have to have ideas on how to execute or else you'll execute poorly. So execution ideas are a subset of ideas. And so you have to be able to write down good execution ideas too. But I found out after writing 10 ideas a day for 3, maybe 6 months, I was suddenly coming up with lots of good ideas. And this is a subject of a whole other podcast, like where it led me to. It changed my entire life once I started coming up with good ideas. But the first list I wrote was I wanted to write a book, How to Beat Your Friends at Every Game in the Universe. Because I was thinking a lot of times friends get together or families get together at Thanksgiving, and after the dinner, they break out board games. And at the time, board games were a recession-proof business category, like Monopoly or Scrabble or chess or checkers. Now, because the internet, this doesn't work as much anymore. Everybody plays games on the internet, or there's more where kids play different games now. Like I went into a game store the other day and chess and checkers were in the nostalgic category as opposed to the real categories. So I bought Boggle for my kids in the nostalgic category. But anyway, the first list I made was the 10 chapters I would write. So it was like chess, checkers, Othello, poker, bridge, hearts, Monopoly, Scrabble, and backgammon, and a couple others. And then the next day was the execution ideas. Okay, how do you get better? What are 3 easy ways to get better at Scrabble so you could beat everybody else who doesn't know these 3 ways? So for instance, if you know the 96 2-letter words, if you know all the Q without U words, and if you know, the 4-letter words that start with J, you could be, even if those first 2 tips, you'll beat anyone who doesn't know that XI, XU, and QI and ZA are words, you'll beat. Anyone who doesn't know that QAT, QOPF, QANAT is a word, you'll beat. That's all you need to know to win at Scrabble. So I came up with the ideas for each chapter. Never wrote the book because you don't have to. You don't have to follow up on any of these ideas. And again, within 3 to 6 months of just doing this, my ideas were so good at that point that I did start making money. I started 2 different careers, one as a hedge fund manager, the other as a professionally paid writer, just because of the ideas I was writing down in my waiter's pad, which is a whole different story of how I got to that point. But I wouldn't have been able to write those ideas on day one. It took me 6 months of every day writing down 10 ideas a day. But I will add, the one thing I never said about this was once I started writing those 10 ideas a day, I got such confidence in myself that it literally saved me from depression. I came up with ideas on how to maybe sell my house rather than get it completely seized. And in fact, I took a huge loss, but was able to sell the house. And just the confidence alone, I was still back and forth depressed, but writing the 10 ideas a day was almost like an antidepressant for me. And so, yeah, does that answer
It's
the
very helpful.
the
Yeah,
question?
that's great.
I mean, I could literally talk for an hour about all the lists I've made on the waiter's pad. Often I write posts based on the list of the day. I just wrote, my list today was $10 billion business ideas. All of them probably bad ideas, but I'm going to write a post on it just to kind of show my process. And anyway, we're going to do
Thank
a
you.
part two. If anyone has questions about these life hacks or wants to throw out other ones, tweet me at Altucher. Steve, you're not on Twitter yet. You gotta
I gotta get to the 21st century.
or follow me on Instagram. 'Cause
Yeah.
I post a lot of my waiter's pad lists on Instagram. So follow me on Instagram at Altucher. And
Social media, I'm coming for you soon.
so Kamal, thanks
is on.
for being.
Kamal, what's your handle?
Thanks for hanging out.
That was fun.
Beliana, thanks for visiting.
Clapping.
And Jay, thanks for the audio engineering. And WeWork, again, they're not sponsoring this, right? They're not paying me
Yeah.
to say this. This is a fucking amazing place. I'm
And
looking
next-
out here. Everyone's like
And by the
having
way-
a party and working at the same time.
By the way, next time we play Scrabble, J is a 3-letter word that begins with J, right?
That's true. All right. Thanks a lot, Steve. We're going to do a part 2 on this.
Yeah, thank
and
you.
talk
And
to you
thanks.
soon.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
That's great. Yeah.
It was a great episode.
Okay. By the way, you know how to win do you play checkers?
Not since I was a kid.
Checkers is a great game, actually. People think checkers is like a dumb chess. It's actually a really hard game to play, but I'll just give you one piece of advice. Start with the corner where you have 2 corners on your back row. One has one of your checkers right in the corner. The other has no checkers in the corner, and you have the 2 checkers on the surrounding the corner. Start with the side that where you have the checker in the corner, and just move. I don't know how to describe this. Move from the diagonal, starting with that corner. Just move all your checkers aiming towards the other guy's corner, and that's a tip to win in checkers.
Okay.
Okay, and Monopoly. That's one's so hard to explain why. Let me do a different one. Monopoly. Own the orange squares. So New York Ave, St.
Was it
James
Park
Place.
Place?
And no, that's
No?
the blue squares.
Okay.
Tennessee Avenue, St. James, and New York. And do whatever you can. Give up Park Place and Broadway, which are the blue squares. Give them up if you can get the orange squares. And I'll tell you why. Can you guess why?
No. The placement, or like how often people end up there?
Yes. How often people end up there?
Just
But
the
why?
dice roll. The dice.
Well, I'll tell you why. Because what's the most common square that you're on in Monopoly, in a game of Monopoly? What square will you end up on the most in Monopoly? Okay, I'll tell you. You'll end up in jail, because there's so many ways to end up on jail. You can either roll the dice, or there's 2 community chess cards that can get you to jail, or there's the go to jail square that also gets you to jail. So there's 4 or 5 different ways to end up in jail. Now, the most common dice roll is a 7. The 7 actually ends you up on a utility, but the utility is right in the middle of all the orange squares. So the property you're most likely to end up on in a game of Monopoly is the orange squares. So get the orange squares, build hotels there as fast as possible, and you'll clean up a Monopoly against your friends and family.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry, and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so How do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.